Welcome to episode 25 of the Yoga Meets Movement Science podcast. Today, our topic of focus is the excellent and fascinating topic of posture and alignment. Posture and alignment. And those are two really synonymous words. They kind of can mean the same thing. But we tend to find that in general, when people hear the word posture, maybe they tend to think more of just like one's daily static posture, like standing or sitting, their posture just all throughout the day. And when it comes to the term alignment, that's a little more in our experience, a little more kind of like yoga movement focused or centered. I at least just find that in the yoga world, there's a lot of talk about your alignment in your yoga poses, but ultimately kind of like it's just two words. I feel like they're kind of interchangeable. And when it comes to posture and alignment, I know that Travis and I, we tend to get a lot of questions about these topics. And also we know just in society, there are a lot of beliefs and a lot of talk around posture and alignment. So like, what's good posture? What's bad posture? What's the connection between posture and like health, or posture and pain, things like that. And in the yoga world, using a little more of that term alignment, I guess, in a yoga movement practice, there's a lot of talk around like correct alignment in a yoga pose and incorrect alignment. And just, whether your posture or I just used that other word, whether your alignment in a yoga practice may affect potential pain that you may experience, or, things like that. So, because we get a lot of questions about these topics, Travis and I had been planning for a while to do an episode that was just focused on this as a pulled out topic. And today, in order to do that very well, we decided to invite on a very special guest to help us talk about this today. And for some of our audience members, we know that he'll be very familiar to you. You'll definitely know of him, but for others, he may be a new voice that we're super excited to introduce you to. But our guest today is Todd Hargrove, and he thanks for saying hi. He is someone who Travis and I, we've really admired his work and his content for years now. For years, I personally have learned so much from what Todd has shared. I find, Travis and I both find that he's really an amazing educator, like really skilled at breaking down complex topics and communicating about them in simple, digestible terms. So we really admire him for that. And just to give you a background of who Todd is and kind of what he's about, he's a Feldenkrais practitioner. He's a Rolfer, which that's like that also called structural integration, a type of manual therapy or body work. He's an author. He's a research reviewer for Physio Network. He's a former attorney. He's written a blog at bettermovement.org since 2008. And that blog focuses on applying a modern understanding of pain science and neuroscience to movement-based therapies. And last but not least, Todd is the author of two excellent books, A Guide to Better Movement and Playing with Movement. So with all of that said, we are super excited and thankful to have you here to talk with us and to share with our audience. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me. Wow, good intro.
We get everything?
Yeah, that was well summarized.
Oh,
Very
thanks. Cool. Yay.
So my personal claim to fame is that I've met Todd on two occasions, and been very fortunate to do so.
Once.
No, there was a repeat performance.
That's so. Awesome. Yeah, you guys have hung out before, from my understanding.
It's true.
In Seattle, I got to see Travis do a flag.
Yes.
You did a human flag, like that sideways. Oh
my gosh. Outside the coffee shop. I try to do a flag in every state or every new state that I go to. So that might have been my only flag in the state of Washington. I'd have to check my records.
I didn't make you do a flag the second time we met. I remember that. I don't think so.
Well, I could still do it next time. And we're working on yours, right?
Mine. Yeah, I can do a vertical flag.
Hey.
That's in yoga. That's like Urdhva Hastasana, like standing with your arms up. I like that. That's funny.
So let's go ahead and roll into our first question for you, Todd. And I'm curious, you've written a lot on your blog over the years about this, but just to
Mm-hmm.
give the audience your perspective, like how do you
Mm-hmm.
define posture? Of course, Jenni mentioned it, and especially the way that she looks at it from a yoga context. But what does that word mean in your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would think of posture as being the alignment of your body when you're kind of not doing very much or you're not really moving around that much. I mean, we're always moving. I mean, even as I'm sitting here in this particular posture, there's always a little bit of movement going on, but it's not that much. I mean, I might be moving my head, I might be moving my hands around, but I think a posture is like your alignment when you're not really moving around that much or have that much to do. And so you could have a sitting posture or a standing posture, um, kind of an athletic ready posture. Um, yeah,
Sleeping posture, maybe? Is that like
what's
a
that?
word that
Mm.
a
Yeah,
sleeping posture?
yeah, sleeping posture for sure. I think it just describes how you are when you're not doing that much. And I guess there's not that many positions, resting positions for there to be. There's sitting, standing, probably a lot of different sitting postures. But yeah, so it breaks, there's probably like 6 or 7 common postures that we're using all the time.
So then what would you use a different word for position when you're talking about movement?
Mm.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, let's say if I'm in the middle of a golf swing, there's a certain position that I'd want to hit, but I'm moving through it very quickly, so I wouldn't call that a posture. I'd call
Right.
the ready position for golf. That's your posture when you're getting started. But as soon as you get moving, you're moving through positions, and you have a certain alignment in those positions. But I wouldn't call those positions posture if you're moving through them really quickly.
Yeah, I when I think about strength training, which is my lens usually, I'm thinking about like we would say it's your form or your technique, and then like Jenni said, in yoga they often refer to it as the alignment, and maybe because yoga is like a lot of static postures and then transitions between them, maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's why they're focusing on the I don't know why there's another word for it
Yeah, I mean, I guess
when
a
they're so
static
synonymous.
static position is a posture. Yeah, I think it's the lack of movement which would cause us to call something a posture.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like I mean, I guess there are ideas around posture or how we arrange ourselves in movements and in transitions, like with strength training and form or yoga alignment. But I find that there's a lot of talk just around our static day to day posture and how important that is, and that there are these ideas around good or optimal posture and bad posture. What would you say, Todd, is like society's idea of what constitutes good posture versus bad posture, in kind of your definition of what posture is?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say society. I mean, there's definitely something about our body language, which is it's always a social thing. I mean, the way that you're posturing yourself, the way that you're moving is sending social cues, and there's social norms
Hmm.
about the way you're supposed to move and the way, and because you're always sending signals to people about whether you're submissive or whether you're dominant or whether you're conforming or whether you're being sexual or whatever you're doing, the way you move and the way your posture is sending social signals, and society wants to tell you to send signals in a certain way. So there's always kind of a social element to it.
Hmm.
But like in our culture, for a while now, upright posture is associated with a little bit with being an upright citizen, and the sit up straight idea and the be symmetrical idea and to maybe sit still. There's kind of like social messaging and social values coming
Hmm.
into this idea of what's the right posture and what's the wrong posture. So that kind of influences the whole thing. And then you've got that kind of influences ideas about what's bio. You can kind of confuse the right social posture with the right biomechanical posture,
Right.
and kind of maybe those are two different ways to think about posture, but you could get those confused. And different cultures, different types of movements are okay. Like in South America, moving your hips is more okay than moving in the United
Hmm.
States, which that kind of sends like a sexual signal. In the United States, some cultures don't want those signals to be sent, and so all that stuff can kind of get wrapped up.
That is such a great point. There are so many like cultural associations around different postures and what they mean and what we communicate through how we move and position our body. And I really like how you delineated between kind of social ideas around posture versus what people think biomechanically about posture. And so I guess, I mean, I love all of it. As yoga meets movement science, since that's our podcast topic, I guess more the biomechanical side is a little more like what we'd want to kind of dive in and what we talk about today. And
They're
I know
so
that's
intertwined though too, right?
But just as
Yeah.
far as the biomechanics go and these ideas around, certain postures preventing pain, certain postures creating pain or injury, things like kind of in that realm.
Yeah, so the biomechanics, the concern with having a biomechanically correct posture, I'd say
Mm-hmm.
it's overrated is the right word that I like to use. It's not that posture doesn't matter for pain and it doesn't matter for stress, but I would say that it's overrated when you look at the research and our ideas about what is the best biomechanical alignment. It tends to overrate symmetry. It tends to
Mm-hmm.
overrate verticality and length. I think that those things are associated with good posture and health. So if you see someone that's kind of like
Oh,
this is their posture, it's really twisted.
you're
It's
showing like
really
hunched over and
yeah,
rounded.
like at the
Yeah.
extremes, someone who's really hunched over and really twisted, that person, I do believe there is a more likelihood that they're injured, that they're in bad health. And when you see someone
Right.
with just like really upright, symmetrical posture, there's probably a little bit better chance that they're a healthy, functional person. But for like 80% of the population, I don't think you're going to be able to judge their health, their freedom from pain, their function that well by looking at their posture. And I think the research kind of bears that out too.
That makes so much sense to actually think about like yeah, at the extremes maybe there's some correlation, but in general, yeah, I mean maybe we're kind of mapping on these ideas around someone's posture being a causal for certain ideas around health and pain, but maybe in some cases it's the result of health and pain going like it's
Yeah.
like this reverse direction.
Yeah.
And then yeah,
Oh,
thank you
yeah.
for
That's
making
the
that point.
research is looking for correlation. So I
Mhm.
came into all this, being interested in yoga, being interested in Feldenkrais, and all of these things I was interested in. The idea was posture is really important. You got to have good posture to prevent
Mhm.
pain. You can improve your posture to improve pain, and that's what I was looking to do in my own body. And I did these different
Right.
practices, and I would work on my posture, and I felt better afterwards. And my belief and my observation was posture is really important for pain. But when I started looking into the research, I was surprised to see in this research they're looking for correlations between posture and pain. So they get a population of people and they do objective postural measurements, and they try to see whether there's a correlation between how much kyphosis you have in pain, or whether you have forward head posture in pain, or whether leg
Mhm.
length discrepancy is associated with pain, or whether women who are pregnant and get more lordosis during the pregnancy, do they have more pain? And for the most part, these studies find that there's not that much correlation between objective measures of posture and pain, and I found that pretty surprising.
Right.
I
And
can
you said that
imagine I can imagine coming from the training that you had done, right? Feldenkrais, Rolfing, like
Mhm.
those, from what I understand of them, are very much like you said, very posturally influenced. And so so that like the that I would imagine getting that training and then like getting turned on to the research side of things must have been like a pretty dissonant experience,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Not so much with the Feldenkrais, more with the
Yeah.
Rolfing, the idea of being really upright and having those
Mhm.
blocks stacked. All the
That's
blocks
like
of your
their
body.
logo, right?
That's
Like
the
the plumb
Rolfing
line and
logo,
the
is that the blocks are stacked. Actually, there's like a before and after. There's someone with the blocks kind of rotated and not stacked that well, and then the second part of the logo is all the blocks get lined up, and then all of a sudden you're in a much better situation. So yeah, that's
wow.
that's kind of a surprising idea. And some of the studies do find correlations between posture alignment and pain, but the effects tend to be small. The methodology for all these studies is not great.
Mhm.
But if you look at the systematic reviews, if you look at all of them together, I think there's a systematic review done in 2008, which looks at 54 studies. Sagittal alignment finds that you look at the whole thing, and we're not finding much here. We're not finding good methodological quality. We're not finding that there's good correlations between sagittal postural alignment and pain. There are some studies that find minor effects, but my reading is it's overrated. It's not it's not that important of a factor for predicting pain, and therefore probably not so much for treating it either.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think for some people, like, and I'm just kind of like painting with a broad brushstroke, but society in general, I think we do have these really widespread embedded ideas that sitting up straight or having that tall spine, or I feel in yoga when when I hear words around alignment used, there's a lot of talk around like stacking your spine up, or feel like
And
if you're
neutral.
neutral is a good one. Or if you're standing in Tadasana, that's like the yoga word for like mountain pose or standing, like align your pelvis like over your heels and align your rib cage over your pelvis, align your head over your rib cage. And on the one hand, it can be nice to like embody a position like that and just notice how it feels, and notice like when I'm here, this is like I am, in this stacked position, notice how that feels. But on top of that, there tend to be layered on these ideas that it's like the restacking of the blocks, like you described from the Rolfing logo, like this idea that that's just inherently better, that tall and stacked is
Yeah.
better. So I think for many people to hear you suggest that you think that the ideas like that are overrated, I feel like that could be kind of a big realization, or cause them to question a lot of beliefs that they hold.
Yeah, now I think that, like, let's say you try to get aligned, it's your intention to get as tall as possible. It's your intention to get as stacked as possible. That's a good postural challenge that will
Oh
challenge
yeah,
you to do something maybe you're not used to doing. And maybe you'll gain more
right.
length somewhere, or more strength somewhere, or you're challenged the stability of certain muscles, or you're challenged the ability of other muscles to lengthen, or it'll be a coordinative challenge, or it'll be like a proprioceptive challenge.
Mm-hmm,
And when
mm-hmm.
you challenge yourself, you get better at stuff and you adapt, and those adaptations may be useful. But you shouldn't get the idea that it's necessary for me to be assuming this position all the time, or else I'm going to be unhealthy, or I'm going to get hurt, or something like that. So yeah, those are great challenges, uh, um, but they can come with that potentially damaging idea, which can
Mm-hmm.
get into your head. I'm going to have a problem if I'm not well aligned all the time. It can start kind of innocent, but I've got it myself where I enjoyed these postural challenges. I felt better after engaging in them. I felt more aware in my body and strong in my body and stuff like that. But what came along with this was this idea: I need to maintain my alignment, and over time it becomes kind of oppressive.
So it's tricky to, as the yoga teacher or the body worker or the physical therapist, to give that challenge without layering on
Mm-hmm.
that narrative of the right versus the wrong, or this is the thing that you have to do all the time. So yeah, we can work towards those things, and they can help us feel better, maybe for the not quite the reasons that we think, but without ascribing that narrative to it that then can lead to that slippery slope.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that idea I think the teachers can protect against that by just kind of watching the way they talk about things, not
Mm-hmm.
suggesting that it's wrong, that there's so much right and wrong to it. Like, you can talk in terms of different options, like you could try your posture like this, or you could try your posture like that. Those are all different challenges. You don't have to always go for symmetricality and uprightness and what everyone thinks is like the perfect posture. You can try asymmetrical postures. They're all like different options. That's the way that Feldenkrais is pretty helpful. There's the idea in Feldenkrais that there's many different ways to move. They all have their different time. They all have their different place. We want to really, when we put attention on the body, we want to have this kind of non-judgmental attention. I think that kind of helps, not develop these ideas about, there's really a wrong way to move.
Yeah. I wonder if the teacher, has to can just avoid talking about it, or should be go out of their way to make sure that they're countering it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Like
Like
countering
if I
those
just
ideas.
if I just don't talk about any of those ideas, is that enough, or do I need to be deliberate about not about mentioning that this is not right or wrong, good or bad?
I don't know. I guess it kind of depends on the on the way the teaching's done. Like if I'm doing like Feldenkrais, I have people do a particular movement in multiple ways, and then I have them pay attention and feel like, and one of those ways might be like the wrong way.
In
So,
air
I mean,
quotes.
yeah. So I mean, let's say you're doing like a forward bend and you're going down and touch your toes. Now it's something that a lot of people would say the wrong way to do it is to do it with a lot of lumbar flexion.
A
The
rounded
right
spine.
what's the right way to go down and do a forward bend? The right way is to maximize your hip flexion and to minimize lumbar flexion, right? A lot of people would say that.
Yep.
Uh, but if you're having someone do a forward bend, instead of kind of telling them this is the right way and that's the wrong way, you could have them do it both ways
Mm-hmm.
and then have them decide for themselves what's the difference there. Which way do you go further? Which way feels stronger? Which way feels more stable? How do your hips feel when you do it this way? How does your low back feel when you do it that way? So you're letting them notice the difference between those two different options, and you're saying
Yes.
like, look, these are two ways to do a forward bend. These are two ways to move. What do you think? What? And so you're not like telling them that's the wrong way to do it, and so they don't get that idea, and they're like exploring these different options. And yeah, I think that's and you can find other examples with that, like when you're different ways to squat, different ways to do anything.
Absolutely.
In your yoga classes, Jenny, you talk about like a roll down versus
Mm-hmm.
what's
Hip
the
hinge. A
yeah
halfway in yoga, like halfway lift, Ardha Uttanasana.
yeah. So you actually present two different techniques. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was Jenny Rawlings original or something that you picked up
I
from
think
somewhere else.
I think I mean the quote halfway lift in yoga, which I think Todd, you might know that is just like a hip hinge where you keep the spine neutral and hinge forward roughly halfway, maybe
Yeah,
fingertips on your shins or something. And that's like the traditional yoga transition. Like maybe you start standing, you raise your arms up and then you fold forward.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And find that halfway lift and then maybe, but basically the idea is like you're maximizing the hip flexion, like you said, this one strategy, and minimizing the lumbar flexion or the rounding of the spine. And I think I just remember in my earlier days of teaching yoga, hearing and learning of language around that rolling down, which would be when you start standing and then chin to chest
Yeah,
and
yeah.
one by one roll all the way down, that was supposed to be dangerous for the spine and injurious and injure the discs, any number of like warnings that you tend to hear. So that was supposed to be a transition that you never taught as yoga teachers. And I know different movement traditions are different. I think in Pilates, I think they intentionally do a lot of rolling down, my understanding. So anyway, because of that, and then having a little bit of a broader perspective on movement that I like to teach both intentionally, both the hip
Yeah, yeah.
hinge and cue the roll down. Sometimes I'll say whichever feels better, whichever feels like a better fit for your body in the moment, but sometimes I'll intentionally cue it just so that, so people can feel these movements in their bodies and realize that they're fine and that they can feel good. And like you said, Todd, they can offer different things.
Yeah, and you can kind of get people sold in this idea that good movement is not so much about being able to repeat this stereotypically textbook perfect technique every single time. It might be about having a huge vocabulary of different options, different ways that you can do the same movement. That's what good movement's about. That's what healthy movement's about. That's what functional and safe movement's about, is many, many, many different ways to do the same thing. So you can kind of have that idea,
Absolutely.
and you can teach people that idea that, hey, we want lots of different ways to forward bend, not just one perfect way. And that kind of, it's, people understand that with sitting too. It's kind of like if you had the chance to sit for 8 hours with one perfect posture, or you were
Mhm.
allowed to use like 1,000 different postures, which you would you choose? You'd want the you'd want the variability, not the perfection. And it's the same with movement.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that so well. It yeah, like seems like that term variability, movement options seem to really play a role here. So Todd, what you were saying about the idea of sitting in that example that you used, and that there doesn't necessarily, maybe that emphasis on like one single correct or good posture versus the idea of like maybe a variability in your possible sitting postures, maybe that could be helpful. I really like that you pointed that out, and it made me think of like the whole field of ergonomics. And I feel my impression of ergonomics is that it's very much about like setting someone up. I think often like in an office setting, so sitting at your desk and having everything aligned so that you have all these correct joint angles and wrists lower than elbows, things like that. What is what you were just suggesting about maybe variability being preferable? How does that reconcile with something like the field of ergonomics?
Yeah, I think ergonomics has probably not done as good of a job as they could have at checking whether their ideas about good posture and alignment correlate well with health and pain. So I'm sure
Mm,
it's based on solid biomechanical analysis of moment arms and forces and loads in the body and stuff like that.
right.
But it kind of forgets that you're dealing with a biological thing and not a mechanical thing. And there's like big differences between machines and
Mm-hmm.
organisms when it comes to variability. So like a
Wow.
well-functioning machine needs to shut down all of the variability so that it's always moving in exactly the same pathway all the time. And if things are variable at all, then that's a sign of dysfunction in the machine. It's you need to, if there's any play in the joint, it needs to be tightened down. But in an organism, things are supposed to be very variable, and every step you take is different, and every heartbeat is at a slightly different timing than the other one. And more variable,
Right.
less variability usually correlates with worse function in a lot of ways. And it's just kind of the nature of a living thing to be incredibly variable. That's what allows you to learn from mistakes. That's what allows you to be robust and not break down when you do the same thing every time, because you're always doing it in a slightly different way. Yeah.
Well, thank you for explaining that. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And just in general, and I know that you've written about this a lot in your work, but just the importance of variability and what that could have to offer. And I love how you mention that it can be really great for learning as well, and potentially, would you say that like my impression of the Feldenkrais practices that I've taken before, and I know you're a Feldenkrais practitioner, is that that's very much a practice that's all geared around like variability, and that often people who partake in Feldenkrais type practices have positive outcomes with reducing pain. Do you think there's a connection there?
Well, I mean, so yeah, like here's the way you would do something in Feldenkrais. So you've got some theme of a Feldenkrais lesson, which might be reaching overhead or forward bending or squatting or rolling over or flexing or extending. So usually what you're doing is you're doing that same basic thing in a wide variety of ways with slightly different attention, slightly different intention, maybe moving on a slightly different angle. And you're kind of comparing all the different ways to do the movement, and you find out which ways are easiest for you, which feel most comfortable, which are strongest, most stable, get the most range of motion. And so, one thing you figure out is which one of these different ways of doing it is kind of better for you, because what if it might work, might have five different people might have five different ways of doing it that's the best for them. And the other thing is that you discover more potential ways to do the movement, so you're more fluent in movement, you have a bigger movement vocabulary, and you don't develop this idea that there's right and wrong ways to do it. Maybe right and wrong for you, or better or worse for you, but it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
without that judgmental kind of stuff making you fear movements that you shouldn't fear.
That makes a lot of sense. And when I think about that perspective and something like a yoga practice, which is, like my movement lens for kind of coming to all of this, I feel like whereas a practice like Feldenkrais or perhaps other somatic type practices, if you would agree that Feldenkrais is a somatic type practice, they seem to be much more about like non-structured movement, open-mindedness, non-judgmental. I feel like in the yoga world, yoga can be taught kind of with a spectrum of emphases. And on the one side, and this I find to be the prevailing approach in yoga. Things are done very much like this is the way that you do this pose, and this is the way you transition, like every time, right, wrong, repeated the same. This is just like that's the practice. Very like kind of prescriptive, or I feel like maybe Todd, in some of your writings, you write about like top down versus bottom up as far as like guiding movement. And that seems to me where it's like prescribing to other people, like this is how we move. That's more top down. And I'm not suggesting that that's inherently bad or not a good way to go, but I just think it's interesting that there's a wide spectrum, and that one could teach something like a movement, a yoga class, from more of that approach that is like we're still maybe moving through these poses that we're familiar with. Like people know down dog, they know warrior two. These are just kind of archetypal shapes, if that could be a word that you use, but that people could choose to embody them in maybe different ways, or just explore them differently and see how their own bodies like resonate with these different ways of arranging the body. Teaching yoga in a more exploratory manner
Yeah.
versus a more prescriptive manner. Like I guess I just think it's interesting to look at that as a movement practice, where certain movement practices are all about bottom up, and then others can be, much more top down, or maybe a blend of the two. And I personally feel like I've tried to embody a style of yoga teaching that's a little more kind of in a little more on that exploratory side within the container of structure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
like
can do it either way. Oh, go ahead, Travis.
how many different ways can you embody this shape or transition in between this shape versus like, oh, this is the way that we're all aspiring to do this, and then that gets into like
Right.
those nitty gritty, like this is the way you want to pull this thing and activate this muscle and
Oh, there's a whole that too.
whatever else.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So if you do like the bottom up exploratory approach, some form, some technique will emerge. It just kind of shows up like
Mm,
organically. It just like evolves, not one that you are intending or trying to do, but which may be better and more effective than something you decided to make happen, right? But like both
right.
ways are good too. Like you could do the top down thing and say, I want to make this exact shape happen. And so there's this discipline of concentration and like forcing your body to do a certain thing. And then there's another attitude where I'm going to explore different ways of doing things. And then maybe something will show up, something emerge, something will happen, which I didn't even know until the moment. And that thing is more authentic and smarter and more adaptive than anything I could have like imposed on myself, like consciously, but they're both good things to do. Right.
Right.
I like that too. So it's like you said, the experience of trying to get tall in mountain pose, for example, that's
Mm-hmm.
like that characteristically good posture. But
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing actually bad about that, and it might be a good activity to feel where you're sensing things. To I just said this in a negative context, but maybe to turn like to engage certain muscles, like that's not a bad thing to
No, no, no,
engage
yeah.
certain things and strengthen other things. It's just if that's all you're doing and all you're doing is prescribing and all you're saying is this is good, don't do that, do this, as opposed to, well, we could do that some of the time because that's a worthwhile exercise, but then
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously using, or not simultaneously, but and then in the next breath trying the other approach, then you can get
Right.
that perfect blend of both approaches.
Yeah. Yeah, like for example in Feldenkrais, so I do this thing where people are on their back and I have them roll their pelvis forward and roll their pelvis back along the ground so that their low back alternately presses into the ground and arches away from the ground. So really simple flexion and extension of the low back, flexion and extension of the hip joints, rolling the pelvis. Do that in any way that feels good to you. Now imagine that there's a clock on your pelvis and roll exactly from 12 o'clock to
Yes.
exactly 6 o'clock. And I don't care that people can roll exactly from 12 to 6, but that's a challenge, that's different. Then maybe they were
Absolutely.
rolling from 11:30 to 6:30 before, and now when they challenge themselves to roll from 12 to 6, it's like a coordinative challenge. But you can also challenge people to roll from 7 to 5 and from 3 to 4, and any one of those lines,
Right.
when done really, when you aim at a really, really precise target, that's a coordinative challenge. And kind of the location of the target is kind of arbitrary. I could like shoot at a
Mm.
dartboard in many different places. I'm always challenging my coordination if it's a precise location. It doesn't matter so much what the location is, provided that it's precise.
And that in that, like, you're paying attention on purpose and like really
Yeah.
noticing the sensations that arise. Yeah. I love that I think I might have learned that pelvic tilting exercise from you originally. And maybe you called it the pelvic clock, or maybe it's in your book, but I
Pelvic
really
clock
love.
is a popular, Feldenkrais lesson based
Mhm.
on just kind of what I was just saying there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just really not like, I feel like guiding, especially yoga students, where we kind of all know cat cow, which is, and it's more global, that include, the whole spine and also the head, but that's like full extension, full flexion, often on hands and knees, but you can do it in many positions. But I think that, yeah, in yoga there's like a lot of emphasis on pelvic movement in the sagittal plane, which is that plane of movement seen from the side, so the forward backward tilting that you were talking about, Todd. But this idea of bringing people in and trying to see if they can and explore in their own body, make it more fine tuned and move in this like more multiplanar manner, in with this like details of coordination that certainly create a challenge, which makes them have to pay attention more. Do you
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry. Do you think that there could be, maybe just like in a broader sense, some connection between like an exercise like that, like paying attention to pelvic movement in this fine-tuned manner, and potentially having some positive effects on something like chronic low back pain?
I could imagine that happening for sure. I mean, chronic low back pain is so complex, and there's so many different variables involved that it's a real puzzler for sure. And so posture might matter, and movement might matter, and the condition of the tissues, like whether there's a herniated disc or a bulging disc, might matter, and whether there's inflammation there might matter, and general health might matter, and psychological issues and social issues. And whenever you do anything to like try to intervene on any one of those variables, like so let's say you do an exercise and I'm going to
Mm.
work on my posture, or I'm going to work to strengthen this muscle, you also are necessarily doing lots of other things as well. You're affecting the nervous system
Right.
and the psychological system and all these things, and you never really know exactly which one is the one which accounts for the benefit, if there is any benefit. um, but there's a lot of research on let treating low back pain, and it seems like many, many, many different things work to help chronic low back pain. None of them work great. All of them work a little bit sometimes for some people, and it makes me think that just moving with a positive, hopeful attitude is the key ingredient, and you should try moving in lots of different ways. Many, many different exercises can help for low back pain. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, pain is so complex, and more complex than I think in our common language that we tend to hear, that likes to boil things down
You
to.
mean it's not just my anterior pelvic tilt?
It's not just your anterior pelvic tilt, Travis.
Thank you for bringing that up, Travis, because that was actually totally on my mind too, because we were talking about low back pain. But we did throw out, Todd, before this recordings, to our audience, if they wanted to submit some questions for you around this general topic, and we actually got multiple questions about anterior pelvic tilt along the lines of, does an anterior pelvic tilt cause future back pain? Um, what's the connection between anterior pelvic tilt and back? There's just, for some reason, I know there are many different like quote bad posture quote issues that are discussed, but in the yoga world, anterior pelvic tilt tends to be a big one. I feel like that's discussed. Um, yeah, could you talk a little bit about maybe pelvic tilt in general, and what you
Yeah,
would see as its potential connection to how
yeah,
people
yeah.
feel?
So that kind of summary of research I talked before kind of helps answer that question. There's at least one study where they looked at pregnant women who, when they're pregnant, their belly gets big. They sometimes can go into more anterior pelvic tilt as the pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
goes on. This study, they looked at who was going into the most anterior pelvic tilt and who was getting the most lumbar lordosis, and they wanted to know whether they had more or less pain, and there wasn't a correlation there. There's other studies in general that look at uh, forward head posture and kyphosis and lordosis and try to find out whether that's correlated with pain. You'll find some studies where there's a correlation with pain, probably most of them not, or it's only a small amount. So I wouldn't worry that much about anterior pelvic tilt as being a cause of pain. I think maybe people worry about it a lot because that is kind of like one of the easiest things to see and measure as far as
Right.
posture goes. It's right there to be seen kind of easily. And also it kind of like it correlates with your belly looking bigger, which is something people also don't want. So, I don't know. I mean, like what we were saying socially before, I think it's one of the reasons posture gets overrated. I mean, there's a million things that contribute to low back pain, but it's the ones that are most easily seen and most easily objectively measured that tend to
Whoa.
get all of the attention. And if you could kind of look in a microscope inside someone's low back and see the inflammation that's there, or somehow see the sensitivity of the nervous system, then you would see that those are really, really, really big factors for pain, and people would stop, worrying so much about anterior pelvic tilt. But we can't see those things; we can't measure them very well, and so they don't get as much attention, and we can't control them as well either. And people
Whoa.
people want to put all the attention on the variables that they can control. And if back pain would be just as simple as doing a little bit of a sucking in your gut, that would be
Right.
nice, but it's not.
As opposed to like fixing your life.
Yeah, as opposed to like fixing your life or like, yeah.
Oh my
Well, let me just
gosh.
do these pelvic tilts, and then
Yeah.
that'll take care of that. I can continue living my chronically stressed life.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a little bit about that, that the guy who's looking for his keys under the lamppost, even though he lost them in the alley because the light's better under the lamppost.
I love
There's a little
that.
bit of that.
I really love how you point that out, that like the thing that's just more obvious to spot, almost like with your eye, just naturally can tend to be the thing that we then want to
Forward
put
head
our
Mhm.
posture.
finger.
Forward head posture is pretty easy to spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was actually the second most I'd say second most common like quote bad posture issue that we tend to hear dialogue
So,
on in the
so
yoga
one of
world.
our audience members asked about putting a book on top of your head
Oh yeah.
in
I
a
can see if I can
seated
find her
pose.
exact
I'd never heard
question.
of that before. That's something that you've seen
She
before, Jenny.
her question was, and this is one of the questions for you, Todd. Did you say ask if I'd seen that before?
Yeah,
Yes.
I had never heard of that intervention before.
I had never heard of I mean, I have heard about, like, teaching people, quote, "good posture" by balancing a book on top of their
Okay.
head, and then they walk around. I mean, it
Oh,
seems like Todd is nodding like you've
okay.
heard of
That's your
that.
model training. That's the old school model training, right?
Yeah,
Do the model
exactly.
walk. Yeah.
It does to me feel when I think about that, it feels like decades ago, like, it feels like that's a slightly different era, but yes, balance, yeah. Anyway, so this person, her question was, "Does placing a book on your head during seated meditation help to correct a forward jutting head?" That was
Well,
her
I think it
question.
would because you wouldn't be able to do the exercise. The book would fall off, right? So that is a constraint which would require you to
Mm,
do this, but that doesn't mean that it's something that's going to be good for your meditation or good for your neck or anything like that.
Or
That there's a,
enduring over time, right?
yeah, it is a challenge. It's a challenge to your balance. It's a challenge to your posture. It could lead to some adaptation. I wouldn't expect it to make your neck feel that much better. And I definitely wouldn't fear a forward head posture that much. I suspect that question may be motivated by the
mhm.
idea that a forward head posture will certainly doom you to pain, and there's
Yes,
studies on
neck
that too.
pain.
Studies looking at that. There's a recent study looking at Australian adolescents in school, and there's this idea that all these kids are
Text
texting and
neck.
all this stuff, and they've got text neck. Um, So they grouped all the students into, I think, 4 groups: people with really upright posture who look like they've got a book in their head, people that are really forward and kind of new and in between. And they wanted to know whether there was correlations between which group you were in and pain. No, there's not. There's other studies that show that as well. And it's kind of weird because, when your head is forward, yeah, I mean, biomechanically, there is more stress on the, I mean, it's not as, you're not as stacked, and there's going to be
Mhm.
more stress. But you know what? When you pull your head back here, that might be kind of stressful too. So
That's a really interesting
also
point.
muscles and joints adapt to stress over time. So even though this is, maybe causing more stress somewhere, whatever's getting stressed is getting better over time at handling that particular form of stress. And you've probably been doing that for years and years and years and years and years. There's been lots of time to adapt to that kind of stress. Maybe you're really good at that now.
Thank you for pointing that out, because the body, we like to think of the body as a machine, but it's not a machine, right? It's like a living organism with whose soft tissues, or actually all tissues, have the ability to adapt. Yet we hear, at least I'm sure you're familiar with these, what people say about forward head posture, but it's something like for every inch forward that the head creeps, it places, I don't even know, order of magnitude of load on the muscles of the upper back.
Right.
Like for every inch forward, it's like this much more, and
Yeah.
that's taught in this like fear mongering manner. But
Yeah, I mean, you
yeah.
could look at it the other way. It's like, hey, you want to give your neck muscles a good workout? Bring your head forward a little bit, several times a day, and then your neck will get stronger. I mean, it's
Exactly.
like anything else. I mean, it's like, did you know that walking an extra mile a day puts 10 times as much stress on your body as just sitting around? Yeah, that's true, but it's good for you.
Totally, your body, because stress and load, stress being another word for load in a biomechanical sense, those things are good for our bodies in the right dose, right? Like not too much, not too
The right
little.
kind and the right dose. I mean, for some people, maybe this is the wrong kind of stress, and they'd feel
Mm-hmm.
better. So, I would say, if you suspect that having your head forward is a problem, maybe try to have it more back. I mean, actually, I have clients who they have a lot of neck pain when they work, and they suspect maybe it's related to their posture. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that's possible is that when people get really interested in what's in front of them in their computer, they
Mm-hmm.
start coming forward. Everything's going forward, and they're so absorbed in what's going on there that maybe they're getting into a bad position. So for sure, explore or play with or experiment with a different posture at work and see if it works for you, if you have a problem. But if you don't have a problem and you've noticed that you're like this and you're really worried that there's going to be a problem, I would not be that worried.
I think the other thing too is like, yeah, if you're having pain, you can try something different, but it's more along the lines of this is different, not better. Well, it might be better for you
Mm-hmm.
right now, but it doesn't mean that it's better all the time forever after. So it's like this could be a
Yeah,
temporary.
absolutely. You don't want to put yourself in a movement or postural jail, which I've
Right.
done several times myself. I mean, and it's like it's happened to me several times where I've developed an idea that a certain movement is preferable to another one. I remember reading the idea that your discs in your low back, many rounds of low back flexion can start to damage them. I mean, I read that from
Oh
Stu
yeah.
McGill, based on
Mm-hmm.
research that may be good. I don't know. And so I developed the idea that when I bend down to pick something else up, it would be better to max out on that hip flexion and minimize that
Mm-hmm.
low back flexion, even when I'm picking up a sock or something like that. So I
Right.
kind of got into a habit of doing that, or maybe I was just practicing it because that was like a better way to move. But over time, that developed into a habit where I was never fully relaxed when I was going to pick something up.
Yeah.
And at some point, I just tried to do it in the fully relaxed way. And I noticed that I just wasn't, there was something holding me back there. It wasn't like this. I didn't even have a conscious idea that that was wrong for me. I didn't even think that. But there was like some dumb part of my brain that was like in control of my back and policing it like at all times and like not letting me do that. And when I finally, I became aware of that and I kind of like let that go, I was like, I haven't felt that for a while. And that feels good to like not to kind of let that go. And so you can develop that with lots of things if you pay too much attention to ideas about the right way to do stuff. I mean, Travis, the people when they lift in the gym, they want to have good form, and that's a good thing to do. But then they start getting, kind of like really robotic about a lot of movements. It's like a habit.
Yeah, like, hold on, let me pick up this pencil that I dropped with my perfect hip hinge and keep my upright posture and my chin tucked and my tongue on the roof of my mouth. And it's like, hold on. Hold on.
That sounds kind of along the lines of something we've talked about before on the podcast, Travis. Micromanaging seems a
Right.
little micromanaging to
Right.
me.
And that in the context that we've talked about it before, it's the teacher giving extra detailed and perhaps unnecessary cueing. But Todd, you're saying like this was something that was going on somewhat subconsciously.
Right. Oh,
And
right. That's a good point. It
yeah,
become like a
so, like,
habit for
you're
him.
micromanaging yourself without even like doing it consciously.
Yeah. I mean, and it started with, I don't even really know how much I ever even consciously thought that was a bad movement. I was just, I'm just like really, I'm a movement geek. I pay attention to my body. I want to, challenge myself to move in certain ways. And some of those practices and some of those ideas can, they can kind of turn into some weird habits over time.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I wonder too if like micromanaging to begin with, from the top down, whether it's you micromanaging yourself or a movement teacher micromanaging their students, maybe something could start off in a micromanaging way, but then they just do that movement that way so often that it becomes habit, and then maybe it's not so much that they're consciously thinking about it, but like you said, Todd, it's just the way that the brain has just kind of learned to move their body that way, which results not necessarily in reduction of movement variability if you're
Yeah.
just repeating the same thing all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it goes along with that idea that external cues are better than internal cues for
Oh,
lots of
yes.
things. The motor learning and the performance and stuff like that. So if you pay attention to the thing you're trying to do instead of the way your body's doing it, you'll move more efficiently and you'll learn faster. There's that idea with external cues, and one of that probably, yeah, I think when you put a lot of attention on your body.
Mm,
There's always kind of like a risk to that you'll move in a way that's less authentic and less efficient. And
yeah. Yeah. So just for some of our audience members who might not be super clear on that difference between external and internal cues, what would you say, Todd, that like an external cue would be cueing movement in a way where someone's like interacting with an object or something in their environment, like reach toward the door, or
yeah,
versus think about their muscles and what muscles are firing, or more like how they're doing the movement internally.
yeah,
Would you say
there's a
that's kind
long
of a
long line of research finding that people learn faster, perform better when their attention is focused on something outside of the body compared to inside of the body. For example, jump up and touch something as high as possible versus jump up and powerfully extend your hips. So if you're thinking about powerfully extending the hips, that doesn't work as well as your hand going up like that. Well, in a lot of these
yeah.
Feldenkrais classes and yoga classes, the attention is on the body. Like, notice what's going on in this joint, notice what's going on in that joint. You could put the attention more in the environment. So, you could talk about, push into the floor. So you're talking about the floor, or your hand is reaching towards the ceiling as opposed to you feel
Yes.
your shoulder doing this, that, and the other thing. I think it's okay to definitely have some attention on the body. I do that
Yeah.
in my classes all the time. But when I do it, I want it to be like a non-judgmental attention that's not kind of like
Yes.
attached to too many ideas of right and wrong and safety and fear. I want it to be like a curious attention.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
In yoga, they're often do this to protect this, and Jenni, you
Hmm.
often say like just stop after the do this.
Yeah, exactly. Just drop the protect this.
Great example. Great example. Yeah,
Yeah,
this protects your low back or something like that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So they say, what do we say instead? Well, don't say anything at all. Just
Right.
let them, give them a moment of peace and quiet so they can experience it.
Reflect and feel. Yeah,
So
that make
what about like notice how you're feeling as you're doing it though? Notice your comfort level, notice your, so
hmm
they can note for them, because a lot of people won't notice that they're hurting themselves at all when they do something. They kind of like they're really accustomed to something feeling crummy or stiff or excess, and they don't even realize the possibility that this could be happening and feeling like really good. So they might need their attention like
Mm,
on the body to notice that, right?
absolutely. That's a really good point as well, because we're all so different in our own individual bodies and in what we feel and perceive. So, yeah, giving people the space to maybe realize that there could be a different way that they could feel. If they're used to things always feeling crummy, like you said, then maybe it's nice to open that possibility that they could actually feel good or better or more freedom in a certain movement. Like, I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah, exactly. Because I felt that myself. My best results from any kind of movement intervention is I come out feeling a way that I didn't even really know was possible. That I didn't even know there was tension
Right.
there. I didn't even know that this could feel that free. And then so there's a whole new idea when you're done, right? I mean, your students must feel that all the time after yoga.
Absolutely. Yes, I love how you even experienced that yourself and how you would describe that. I have a question, actually, going a little bit back to something we were talking about a moment ago, which was forward head posture and text neck, and just that idea of like the head being forward and what that's doing to the upper back. So, along these lines, there is a line of thinking that I hear discussed and recommended in yoga a lot, but I know it's very widespread: physiotherapy, physical therapy. This is in that realm as well. But just this idea that, like, when someone has, say, quote, bad posture, or just any posture that they might be looking to change, or that like physiotherapists might want to change in someone, there are these ideas that when it's, say, forward head posture, and that's often accompanied by like rounded shoulders and often this is called upper cross syndrome. It's something
Yeah.
that was like a term coined like decades ago. So the idea is that when someone presents with that posture, generally that's assumed to be bad, and then the idea is that we quote correct it by stretching the pecs, like the chest, and strengthening like the rhomboids or the muscles between the shoulder blades. And the idea is that stretching what is short and strengthening what is long will reset the posture or correct it back to neutral. Are you familiar with
Oh
how that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
works?
yeah. Those your classic. Like you either use the the duct tape or the DW40. The duct tape to make things shorter, and the DW40 to make things
Oh,
longer.
like yeah, I love that
I,
analogy.
I actually used to, when I was a kid and my prosthetic knee started to squeak, I would just spray it, and then it would
With
stop
in your
DW.
squeaking.
in your case,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
exactly.
So actually, for me, it worked like a charm. But
Oh
I
my
know that's a
gosh.
little different.
But wouldn't you say your prosthetic limb is more of a machine? Like if we're talking about like
Yeah,
machine versus
there you
organism.
go. So a perfect
So
example.
maybe it works there. That's really funny. But so, and there's upper cross syndrome. There's also lower cross syndrome, and I just like to mention that because we've discussed anterior pelvic tilt in this conversation, and that similar line of thinking with anterior pelvic tilt. And then it's like certain muscles, like the hip flexors, are said to be shortened, the glutes are said to be lengthened, and therefore to fix it, you stretch the hip flexors and strengthen the glutes. It's bigger picture than that. But just these ideas around posture being like what makes our posture is short and tight muscles and long muscles. Like that's what holds our body in certain positions. And that to change posture, you need to re-stretch and re-strengthen and tighten things back up. Could you speak to that approach at all? Like what whether it's short and tight muscles that create our posture to begin with?
Yeah, I don't think so much. I mean, and part of that is based on just my observations of some people that are really mobile that might habitually be in kind of slumpy positions. Like I've had clients
Mm.
that are dancers. They can get extended. They can open their chest. They can get into any position, but their habitual posture could be slumpy or something like that.
Oh,
So
so it doesn't mean they're stuck there just if
it
that's their
doesn't. I
posture.
mean, yeah, they don't need more mobility. They're just hanging out in the comfortable neutral zone for them, and it's not because they can't get here.
Right.
Uh, but I mean, in general, I'm kind of interested in what people can do much more than their habitual posture. So if someone is like this, and that's their habitual posture, first of all, I'm not really concerned unless for them that seems to be causing a problem.
Right.
Like if they're like, I don't like this or this doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel good to me. My question is, well, can you get here? can you do this? So I wanted to kind of know what they can do. So instead of like getting someone like this, I'd be interested in, can they do a certain uh, functional task that requires them to do this, which for me is like getting your hands overhead. We all need to do that. We need to do that occasionally to reach things overhead. So, I mean, what's something that you need to do in your actual life that requires an open chest? To me, it's like reaching overhead. So okay, if you can't reach overhead, let's reach an overhead. That's like something people should be able to do. And then for like, for the lower cross, the function would be, can you extend the hips? I mean, that's something that we need to do. We need to do that for running and jumping and stuff like that. So, and if that's something that makes sense to work on, let's work on that, especially if you're a runner or a jumper or something like that. So you attach this supposed functional defect to an actual concrete functional task you can work on, and that kind of tells you what to do, and it makes it more meaningful.
Absolutely. And more about like a movement or a movement pattern than about like specific muscles that you're like you said, duct taping or WD-40 or whatever to like make them longer and make them shorter.
Yeah, then you're not working on just some abstract aesthetic ideal. You're working on a concrete function that you can work towards, and it's obvious how to do that.
Yeah.
Could you describe then, like, either obviously this is going to vary wildly from one person to the next, but like, is it about that stretching and strengthening? Is that all it is? Is there, or do you not even look at it in that kind of isolated way? Are you looking at it more in an integrated way? Like, okay, well, we're trying to reach overhead, so we're going to do reaching activities.
I'd probably just do the reaching. I mean, I'm a huge fan of reaching. I've read some. So I've written recently about this. I really like reaching as like one of the most basic, fundamental human movements. One that kind of organizes the whole body. I think like any primate is like built to reach. Some of the reasons I like yoga. I mean, I think of yoga poses as like reaching poses. So many yoga poses are like, if I boiled it down to a simple functional intention, it's about getting the hand as far away from the middle of the body with certain fixed points of support in the feet or another part of the body. So forward bends are about reaching for the ground, and a lot of them are about reaching for something over above. A lot of them are about reaching for something in front of you, like a warrior thing. I mean,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, human bodies are good at reaching. We evolved in the trees. That's what they're made to do.
What a fantastic way to look at yoga and like kind of reframe what some of our poses from a movement perspective could be about. That makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, not all the yoga poses look that way. I mean, and so we're also our bodies get organized really well by, well, I guess reaching with the eyes, like looking for something. Yes. So a lot of rotational movements are like essentially about looking behind you or reaching behind you, or an upward dog to me is about looking up.
Yeah.
It's not about extending the spine. You're extending the spine so you can look up. I mean, that's why our spine extends, so you can look up. I mean, it's one of the reasons our spine extends.
That makes so much
Mind
sense.
blown.
I know. Anatomic terms. So I might talk about like the spinal extension and the back bend. And I think that can be helpful. Like some people just, that's how they like to hear and think about movement, but cue and kind of annotate like you're describing.
Well, it tells you how to cue it. Your cue can always relate to the position of the hand with respect to space, or like what your eyes can see.
I had a teacher one time, and I like texted Jenni right after this. I was like, this was the best cue I've ever heard. She told us to look not just with our eyes, but like with one of our eyes. I guess it was, we were looking maybe up to the ceiling or up to the sky, and it was like, not just look with your eyes, but look with the right outside eye. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God, I've never tuned into that. That's amazing, because it just forces you to get even, deeper or more concentrated.
That's so
interesting. Yeah. There's a lot of Feldenkrais lessons where, like rotational lessons, where you rotate to look behind you, rotate to look behind you. And then, so you do that movement, and then you do it in a slightly different way. Rotate so that the eyes are really leading the movement. So that
Mm-hmm.
the eyes go first, and then everything else follows. Versus, you kind of rotate, and then the eyes lag behind, and you notice the difference in the quality of the movement, and it's very, very, very subtle. But the movement's probably a little bit better organized when the eyes lead the movement, because that's what there's some reflexes there, and that's what your body's designed to do. Your body's designed to follow the eyes. Let the whole spine is serving the ability of the eyes to find a target, and for the hand to find a target. That's like its job. That's all. The neurology is set up that way. The anatomy is all set up that way.
That's mind blown. That's so cool to think about, and to think about integrating. I have a question, which just kind of going back a little bit to when I was asking about the short muscles, tight muscles, and what like organizes or creates our posture. And I just wanted to ask this because I know we've gotten this question several times, because we've mentioned sometimes on our podcast, often influenced by you and your content. But I feel like I've learned, and how you've described this, that posture is controlled and set by the nervous system. Is like kind of what's placing our body in the positions that they're in. And I feel like we've tried to suggest that kind of as a counter to some of these ideas, these more WD-40 and duct tape ideas. We've suggested that on the podcast before, and sometimes people have just not really understood the ramifications of that, or what that even means, like how to conceptualize that. Like, how could it be that posture is determined by the nervous system?
Well, I guess, it wouldn't totally be determined. There's some people that have their posture is really probably very determined by some structural thing that's going on in their body, like the person with osteoporosis. They start to get this huge hump right there, and they literally cannot do this. So they're not doing this because this is a habit. They're doing it because that's the only thing they can really physically do. But like, to take my other example of like the dancer that can really, literally do like anything they want, then whatever they do is going to be set by something else. Some sort of a habit. Maybe the way they're socially comfortable. Some people, their posture is really set by what they feel like is socially comfortable. Some people, they kind of, they don't want to be like this because that sends some sort of social signal that they don't want
like upright, and
so they, maybe they want to show submissiveness. Maybe they want to hide their chest. They want to hide their height, whatever. I think that there's just so many different things that could be, putting you into your habitual shape.
Right.
And the nervous system is the thing that is taking all of that into consideration. The structural limitations and the social limitations and the energy expenditure at every different place, and the comfort, and whether it hurts to be like this and therefore you're like that. And ultimately it's the nervous system that puts you in that position, but it's considering a zillion different factors to do it, and not just the potential length and strength of the muscles. That's the one we all focus on in rehab, but it could be so many other things.
That makes so much sense. And I feel like that really just speaks to the bigger picture that's there. Again, kind of like how tempting it can be to look at the body as a machine, and just these parts that are kind of placed where they're placed. And we might liken that to be just where a short muscle would just pull a bone and keep it there. But like the muscles are ultimately controlled by the nervous system sets your muscle tension and what's contracting and muscle lengths, right? So kind of in that sense, it's like, take a step back and look at this bigger picture.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the people. It's wanting to look at things like a machine is kind of like underlies a lot of those ideas, and it's just so much more of a complex thing.
You write about that so well. Like I like I said in the intro, one of those things you're really skilled at, I think, is taking such complex.
It's the people.
Yeah, and you write adjustable and understandable. I think that's a good example of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There was a question that we got from a listener that Travis and I thought was like an extra interesting one that we wanted to make sure to ask you. So is it okay if I throw that out there?
Yeah.
Here's what the question was. Why is it that the most common, quote, bad posture pains are in the traps, like the upper traps, are in the traps and lumbar spine or the low back? I'm just curious as to why pain seems to concentrate around certain main areas for many people.
That's a good question. I don't know if I can totally answer that. I think that, there's some parts of the body that are more vulnerable to damage and pain than others for sure. I guess that's pretty obvious.
Mm.
Most, people have pain in the low back, people have pain in the neck. I think there's, as the human body evolved, as it went from being, horizontal to vertical, there's certain trade-offs there. I mean, you could like design a body in a million different ways, and there's always going to be certain parts of the body that are kind of be more vulnerable to
Yeah.
stresses than others. And I think it just could be that human design is such that low backs and necks are kind of weak points. You've got they're kind of choke points for all these nerves to get into the extremities, and they have to be mobile and stable. It's kind of a hard thing to accomplish. I think I've heard that our chimpanzee cousins don't have the same rates of spinal degeneration as we do. When humans stood upright, they got certain benefits, but it comes with certain costs, and maybe the cost is to low backs. That's a speculative idea, but it's one that's held by a lot of evolutionary biologists. So maybe you could explain it like that.
That makes so much sense.
Maybe
Sorry,
it
what were you
does
going to say?
justify. Maybe it does justify. Kind of thinking about posture and biomechanics and stuff like that.
Right, because that's like kind of a biomechanical explanation
Yeah.
for why those
Yeah. I
tend
mean,
to be.
yeah. I mean, there's some parts of our bodies that hurts more than others. Knees hurt and low backs hurt, and people get tennis elbow, and I never hurt right here or like right there. I don't know.
That's a really good one. Yeah, it seems like it's often like areas of joints or major joints of the body,
Yeah.
elbow, wrist, shoulder, and the lumbar spine is full of a bunch of joints. That makes a lot of sense. So as you stated earlier on in this conversation, the idea of posture being like a major cause of like pain and dysfunction in the body, you think in general that's kind of overrated. And
Yeah.
I really like how you use that word, because I think it's suggesting that it's not that they never play a role, or that saying that they don't matter completely is correct, but just in general maybe they've been blown out of proportion. So if posture is not necessarily have such a direct causal link with something like pain, or at least not to the extent we tend to hear, what other ways could you see something like asking someone to change their posture, like intentionally change how they hold themselves? And maybe now where I'm meaning like their static posture, their kind of that original definition we gave of like their daily static posture. What sort of context could you see where suggesting that someone actually consciously change that could be helpful or
Yeah,
useful?
I would say so. I would say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you don't have pains in your neck or low back, and you notice that your low back and neck has weird posture, I would not worry about it. Um, if you do have pain in your neck or your low back or some other area, and you're wondering whether fixing the posture might help, then the first thing you should ask is, does my pain vary with posture? Is it
Hmm.
worse when I use the computer? Is it worse when I sit? Is it worse when I'm engaged in certain postures? If the answer is no, then posture is probably not the cause. But if yeah, my pain is varying a lot with posture, that maybe changing your posture can help,
Hmm.
and then you can start to do experiments. Let's try it. And most people do it. I mean, most people, they're sitting and they're starting to hurt. What's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to change their posture. So have
That's
you
right.
already done this experiment? Have you tried? Did your low back hurt when you were flexing forward a little bit? It's completely reasonable. Let's try to sit upright. Most people have already tried that. Let's try a lumbar pillow. Most people have tried that as well by the time they get to the expert. So
Right.
you doing really common sense things like changing your posture. And the other thing, changing your posture is much more likely to be important when you're involved in a high force, high speed activity where you only get chance to get it right. So you're about to, get into some heavy deadlifting. You probably maybe you don't want to just do whatever comes naturally, or let's explore and let's see what emerges and it's all good. Maybe you want someone there saying, look, this is what your posture's got to be under that heavy bar. I'm not sure saying that's definitely true, but it's more true than like, okay, you don't need to get so strict when you just going to sit down at your desk and do some work. These are high force activities. You don't have any practice with them. You haven't already adapted to them. Then, maybe worry about your posture. And if function's really important, posture determines your function. So like if you want to hit a golf ball very far or throw very hard, your body's going to have to get into certain kinds of alignments or postures to create the necessary forces and to do stuff. So, then you ask a coach, how do I do this?
Do you like the idea of, so you mentioned just now like 4 different ways that you could sit. Do you like the idea of kind of deliberately trying to move through many of those different postures, shapes over the course of the day? Because we just said, well, if it hurts to do this, try this, but maybe try this for an hour, try this for an hour, try this for an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, most people figure that one out. Most people, fidgeting is a very normal reaction to discomfort. Right. So you kind of, but you know what? Not everyone does. I have some clients that are like, they're like workaholics and they're very outside of their body with their attention. And they can they're so absorbed at their work all day long that at the end of the day, they're like, wow, my body's killing me. I didn't even notice. Yeah. I'm the complete opposite. I can't, as soon as my body becomes slightly uncomfortable, I can't work. But it depends on the person. And so some people, it's like, hey, is it possible that you could pay attention to how you're sitting during the, some people are like this and they don't notice it.
Shoulders up is what you're showing.
Can we develop some awareness of where your shoulders are and figure out that you don't need to do this and you could actually type like that. So it totally depends on the person. And you,
Of course, it can work against you. Like when I was doing my PhD research and I found out about scapular dyskinesis and winging, I filmed myself doing it, discovered that my right scapula winged. And then for 2 years, I was like, that always feels a little uncomfortable. I feel like my right shoulder blade's a little bit off of my back rib cage. And it's that wasn't even part of my awareness until I brought it to my awareness. And I wasn't having a problem. And so, yeah, well, like you said, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
That's me. That's what I was trying to talk about before. That's an excellent example of how, if you have kind of kind of a neurotic kind of a mindset that can even becoming aware of something can.
Yeah. And I knew what was going on and I couldn't stop it. I'm sitting against the back of the chair. I'm like, that feels weird. I'm like, I know there's nothing wrong, but
yeah. I remember listening to this Sam Harris podcast where he was talking about when he gets a medication, he kind of wants to know what the side effects are, but he has his wife read them and then monitor him for it. Because if he reads what the side effects are, he'll start developing them, being a hypochondriac.
Yeah, psychosomatically or whatever. He could just, that's holy. Yeah, because the brain is so powerful like that. It can create.
Yeah, it depends on the person. Some people are like that, and you'll notice, if you look at yourself, you look at other people. Some people are kind of anxious, neurotic, excessive self-consciousness all the time. Some people are totally the opposite of that.
Right.
Yeah, and your intervention when in a one-on-one setting should try to take that into consideration. In a group context like a yoga class, it's tougher to do.
Yeah, exactly. So the opposite of that neurotic person is the person who's kind of like the CrossFitter or the marathoner or the workaholic, someone that doesn't even notice that they've got some huge problem in their body until the end of the workout. Oh my God, look at that.
Right. Right.
They might benefit from it because they developed these catastrophic injuries. And even though they were on the way coming at them, they never saw it coming. Some people imagine things that aren't even there. I mean, some people don't even see the truck that's heading their way,
That is such a good point. Which makes me think that like movement practices like Feldenkrais or those more non-judgmental, non-structured types of movement could be helpful for people like the Type A and the CrossFitter and the workout, just to help them sense their body better.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're doing in a yoga class. You're kind of like introducing people to their body in a healthy way and getting their attention on the body in the healthy way and
Yeah.
developing a healthy relationship to it. And the different people will have very different, different orientations to that.
I never thought about that because so many times people come to me and they're finishing up physical therapy, wanting to get into a personal training context, and we're talking about the injury. They're like, "Yeah, I didn't even. It happened after workout, but I didn't notice it during the workout." I'm like, "That's weird. How could that be?" And now I'm wondering, well, all right, maybe they should have noticed it during the workout,
Right.
and they were just that type of person.
They literally didn't.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. Well, Todd, I kind of feel like we've covered a lot in this conversation, and I think we've mostly covered many of the questions that we had to start off with. Travis, were there any last lingering things that you wanted to ask?
I'm gonna put Todd on the spot. Like, the question is, what would be your biggest or best recommendations regarding posture? I know that's like a kind of a nebulous question, but anything maybe we didn't cover or just summary points?
Summary points, it's overrated. It's not irrelevant. Look into it if you're involved with high forces and dangerous activities. Look into it if your pain varies with your posture. If you're trying to make your posture better, don't think so much about right or wrong. Think about all the different options you have and experiment with them. Like, some people feel better in, sitting with, I feel
Like
better when I
hunched.
sit in slump.
Yeah.
My wife's the exact opposite. She feels better so don't have any presumptions, go with what feels good to you. That's it.
Awesome. I think that last point's especially salient, and we hadn't mentioned that before. Like, if a slumped posture feels good to you, maybe you've been thinking that upright posture was your ticket, and now you've been having pain. Well, if the more hunched over posture feels good, then do that. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's really good to help open people's minds around. Like, that slump can actually be a great posture for people. And it's not necessarily like inherently damaging or dangerous. It's just relaxed.
Humans are built to sit on the ground. When you're sitting on the ground, how many humans can sit on the ground with like a lordosis? I mean, maybe like very, very, very few.
Such a good point.
That's a natural way to sit.
That is a really good point. We're like built to sit that way, it sounds like you're suggesting.
Yeah.
It's all, yeah. I think that hopefully that will help maybe assuage some people's fears and worries and anxiety around things like posture and alignment and how we hold and carry ourselves.
Yeah.
And I just feel so thankful about all of the insights that you've shared today. This has been super helpful and also practical and also very eye-opening. And I know that our listeners are going to now be like, what? Todd is so smart and amazing. And he clearly has a lot to share.
Go get his books.
Exactly. Which we will link in the show notes, of course, both of his books. But where
they're on
else?
Amazon, right?
Yeah.
I got books on Amazon.
Yeah. I have both of them. And they're excellent. But where else would you like to suggest that people find you? We'll list everything in the show notes, of course. But if there's like one place you in the CrossFitter.
Yeah, so I've got toddhargrove.substack.com. So that's my current blog, and that's where I'm blogging. And then I'm on Twitter, Todd Hargrove, and my old blog is bettermovement.org. And I'm not really posting there right now, but if you go to either one of those, you'll find the other one as well.
So there was a transition. Well, I remember recently, because I'm on your email list, you started a member, like a tiered thing. Yes, that's the word. So you get all the best stuff with.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you can pay for it, and you get some things that other people don't.
But you can also subscribe for free.
So you'd just be encouraging me to write more if you pay for it.
If more people pay, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for recommending that. And we'll put links to all of that in the show notes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was so good to have you. We're honored. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you.